So is it legal to fly an ultralight under the influence? Part 103, the FAA's ultralight rule, doesn't tell you that you can't down a few shots of brown liquor and then go flying. Does that mean that the FAA doesn't care if you fly an ultralight intoxicated? More importantly, will the FAA do anything about it if they can catch someone flying under the influence? Can the FAA do anything about that even if they want to? That's what we're going to talk about, and we're going to do that right now. As the president of the United States Ultralight Association, I will occasionally have to help answer some of the more unusual questions. Here is one that is worth sharing. Names have been removed to protect the guilty. The question is, are operators of ultralights required to follow FARs other than 103? For example, the 8 hours between the bottle and the throttle rule. Let's start with a definition of an ultralight. An ultralight is defined by the FAA as a vehicle that is a single seat, weighs less than 254 pounds empty, holds no more than 5 gallons of fuel, goes slower than 55 knots in level flight, and stalls at 24 knots or less. This is an important definition, but notice the definition isn't specific to any certain kind of flying machine. An ultralight can be a powered parachute, a powered paraglider, a trike, or an airplane. There are even ultralight gyroplanes, helicopters, and electric one-man quadcopters. As to alcohol consumption, for those unfamiliar with general operating and flight rules, the FAA is harder on pilots when it comes to drinking than most states are to drivers. Most states say that you are legally impaired if your blood alcohol level is 0.08. Pilots are breaking federal law if they fly while their blood alcohol level is half of that, or 0.04. But on top of that, federal regulations say that certificated pilots are prohibited from piloting an aircraft if they have consumed alcohol within 8 hours of the beginning of the flight. That is the rule the questioner was questioning. First of all, wow, if there is a rule that all pilots should pay attention to, it is the rule against flying under the influence. Part 91, General Operating and Flight Rules, covers it pretty well. Okay, I meant really well. Section 91.17 has 447 words organized into 6 paragraphs, 6 subparagraphs, and 2 sub-subparagraphs telling us that flying under the influence is not a good idea. And when I say not a good idea, I mean no. But wait, there may be an out. The very beginning of Part 91 says that it does not apply to ultralights. Here it is. 91.1 applicability says this part does not apply to any aircraft or vehicle governed by Part 103 of this chapter or subparts B, C, or D of Part 101 of this chapter. And in case you're wondering, Part 101 pertains to moored balloons, kites, amateur rockets, and unmanned free balloons. So nothing specifically says that we can't drink and fly ultralights. In fact, it seems to indicate that the FAA is cool with us getting our drink on before we take to the skies in an ultralight. Well, maybe and probably not. Let's look at the operating rules in Part 103, ultralight vehicles. Section 103.9, hazardous operations, says, no person may operate any ultralight vehicle in a manner that creates a hazard to other persons or property. That is just one paragraph with a mere 19 words. And you notice it doesn't say anything about drinking. But the small phrase, creates a hazard, is a pretty loaded phrase. And it begs the question, how is an FAA inspector going to determine if something creates a hazard or not? Well, the answer is that they are going to go to some kind of documented standard for a particular hazardous operation. And what might the gold standard be for hazardous operations when it comes to the topic of drinking and flying? My guess would be the 447 words in Section 91.17, alcohol or drugs. So what we have here is one example. There are other examples, of course. The larger point is that for ultralight pilots, the regulatory requirements are in Part 103 of the regulations. And Part 103 is incredibly short. That brevity leaves a lot of room for interpretation. But pilots also need to use common sense and behave like good neighbors. Learning the rules that other pilots fly under makes good sense, especially if following the rules doesn't cost anything, improves safety as well as relations with other pilots and those on the ground. Sometimes we recreational pilots can be our own worst enemies. Failing to fly safely at airports by violating normal traffic patterns or doing other things that are viewed dimly by other pilots messes up relationships and makes it difficult for all ultralight pilots. Sometimes entire categories of aircraft find themselves banned for the misdeeds of 1 or 2 people who have long gotten out of the sport or moved away. For example, powered parachutes for a long time were not welcome at many airports in Ohio because of the activities of some regionally notorious pilots in the 90s. Pirate paragliders have lost access to entire states' worth of public beaches because of the poor flying by one or two bad apples who don't even live in affected states. Yet other pilots have lost access to airports because they constantly flew over neighbors' property. Certainly the neighbor's upset is understandable. A two-stroke engine at 100 feet or less every morning can become tedious. It doesn't help anyone when an ultralight pilot points to Part 103 and says that those are the only rules that apply to him. As we have seen, that is true while not being exactly true. It's even less true if someone isn't flying an ultralight that really meets the definition of an ultralight. For example, if a pilot is flying something weighing over 254 pounds with a pilot certificate, he is breaking the law even if he is flying stone cold sober. Bottom line, refusing to not fly safely and according to standard practices hurts the pilot and everyone else who flies something that looks even remotely like what the pilot flies. Fortunately, I believe that most pilots are good apples at their local airport. If most people accidentally do something improper, they will correct their ways if a better practice is pointed out. Unfortunately, though, in aviation, it is sometimes the worst of us who leave the longest lasting impression. We need to constantly police our own for safety's sake and to help increase access for our kind of flying. Whatever it is we individually fly, we should build bridges and not burn them down. Finally, if you are interested in pirate parachute flight instruction in either the Midwest or in Florida, please visit the link to easyflight.com in the description. Flight instruction is the very best way to get introduced to piloting. Thanks so much for watching, and blue skies.